everyday witches emerge from the shadows of secrecy. Broom closets are flinging open and witches are taking flight. Whether you are hiding in your cozy closet or flying with pride, stay for a spell as Witchcasting with Theodora Pendragon and her guests share magical moments, stir the cauldron, and debunk misinformation and misconceptions about paganism, witches, and our wonderful world of magic.
Welcome back. This is Theodora Pendragon, and today my special guest is Keri Emme. She's the Naked Body Coach. Hi, Keri.
How is everyone?
Tell us why you are the Naked Body Coach.
So, Naked Body Coaching actually just came to me randomly. It's kind of funny how it just downloaded. It was after years and years of me getting in touch with myself and learning how to love my own body as it was. I was raised in the 90s when diet culture was at its peak and you weren't supposed to eat, or, you're supposed to be waif thin. And so I learned very early on to hate my body. And as a feminine woman, I think that's a very common experience for people. So I pushed against that in my 20s and decided I was going to not hate my body anymore. Like, instead of punishing myself for existing, I was going to start loving myself and embracing myself. And so through that journey, that's kind of where Naked Body Coaching came from. Like, I became really comfortable with myself and confident in who I was and the clothes I was wearing. And like, I like to be naked. Like, I've gone on naked bike rides and, gone to nude beaches. And it's just, I enjoy all of those things. And I've seen from other people how uncomfortable, like even me mentioning that, they'll be like, oh, like, ooh, I could never, like that, like their stomach drops, when I say stuff like that. And so one day I was driving in my car and it just like downloaded into my brain where I was like, I can help with that, right? Like, this is like one of the things that I can help with, is helping other people shed that learned mentality that we are supposed to hide our bodies and we're supposed to be terrified of how we look. And so Naked Body Coaching was born. Hello.
That is really cool. I grew up in Europe. Nudity is very common. You go to the public swimming pool or the beaches, people are topless, naked, sunbathing. The children are usually naked swimming. So I was used to that. But in the States, coming back to the States, I remember when I was in Germany in the it was about 2001, I met this lady who had just moved there, and she was an American from West Virginia, and she had enrolled her daughter in ballet. And she was mortified because a man showed up for ballet class and just changed his clothes right there in front of everybody instead of going into the bathroom, and she was very upset about it. I said, well, you're in Germany. That's normal.
Right. What's he going to do? He's got to change his clothes.
So you've grown a lot. You went from society telling you you're supposed to be thin. Instead of trying to be thin, you're like, you know what? I have to love me. I have to love my body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I started like I mentioned, when I was a kid, I was taught to hate my body. And I don't think that is an uncommon thing in the US. Like, we're all taught to cover up. And part of that was, I was not just taught to hate my body. I was kind of taught that I was a bad person, right? It comes from my religious trauma of being raised in the Methodist Christianity church. So I was taught that I'm a sinner, right? I'm bad at my core, and Jesus had to die in order to save us because we're all terrible people. And plug in all of these other lessons that we get as children of like God sending floods and famine to kill all of these people because they're terrible. And I'm like, I spent most of my childhood terrified that something like that was going to happen again, right? Like, how do we know God has stopped murdering all of humanity in order to like restart over and over again, as we're taught that he's done multiple times. So I grew up really anxious and it was very uncomfortable being very anxious all of the time. And so that speaks to how much I have grown. Is I could choose to like either medicate, which I did go to therapy. I have panic attacks and things like that. So I went to a psychiatrist who prescribed me medications. I didn't love being on them. And it was so long ago, I really don't remember why I didn't love being on them, but I just remember not wanting to take them. And so I leaned into how can I solve these issues without medication? And that led to, meditating and getting in touch with myself and, emotional regulation and paying attention to my nervous system and all of these things, which they're all connected. It's a spider web of like, that helped me get in touch with my own body, who I am, my own purpose. It helps me love myself rather than be terrified of myself and terrified of the world around me. And it just really helps me tap into love. So yeah, it's been quite a journey. It's been a journey of like being terrified of everything to like embracing love and helping other people love themselves.
Do you think your religion of origin contributed to not loving yourself when you were younger?
Absolutely, 100%. I can draw a nice, neat, tidy line from where I actually have an episode that I spoke about my own religious trauma, about like when my panic attacks started. And I remember actively like what was going through my brain and what led to that. So the idea of eternity with God in heaven horrified me. One, because of what I mentioned, like God, the Christian God that I was learning about, did not seem like a nice being that I wanted to be around. And then also just the idea of never ending eternity, always forever, like this ungraspable concept of just not ever ending, terrified me. It was a very scary. So that's definitely one of my root wounds of trying to process the world as a child and being taught those things.
How did that all change? You left that religion, I'm assuming.
I did, yes. That's a great question. How did that all change? I had a father who was not very nice to me, and I don't know how to explain this better than I didn't believe him. Like, he was verbally abusive and would say really mean things about, no one could ever like you. I don't see how you could ever have any friends. And I remember in the 7th grade, he was going off on me, and I just thought, this is not true. Like, I have friends. I like who I am. I don't want to believe what you're saying. Like, I don't think you're correct. And I've always held on to that one little moment where I was like, I don't think you're right. So I think that was like the moment where I was like, I trusted in myself to be like, I'm going to build a world around myself that seems correct, because the world you guys are giving me doesn't seem correct. And I don't know how to explain like why that is. It just was. It was a truth for me that I was like, your world is not good or fun to be in. So I'm going to make my own world.
How old were you then?
About 12.
What's your spiritual path now? How do you identify with your spirituality? What is your connection?
I don't have a label specifically to what I identify as. I tend to push against any sort of organized, not necessarily, well, organized religion for sure, but any sort of organized spirituality. I like to be in tune with nature. And I like to be in tune with the moon. The moon seems to have a good connection for me. So I have like new moon rituals and full moon rituals. And yeah, I very much lean into what feels correct for me. So sometimes I will go like full on ritual, and I'll pull from different things like, like Wiccans and other things. And I'll like get my candles and I'll welcome in the elements. And sometimes I'm like, I just really would like to journal tonight. Like, I'd like to go outside under the full moon and just like journal and put my thoughts out. But I'm led by my own intuition. So that's the best way I can describe my spirituality.
Did your family have a problem with that because you left your religion of origin?
Yes and no. I mean, they definitely still accept me. I wasn't, ostracized, and they don't refuse to talk to me. But they do bring up Christianity a lot, and God, and like my mom will say, you still have a place, or God still has a place in your heart, is what she says to me, if I mention things, So it's definitely like they're pointing out that I'm doing it incorrectly, quote unquote, and that, I've strayed and I'll return one day is kind of their MO. It's like, you'll come back one day, you'll realize that you've made a mistake and you're coming back, which is fine if they want to believe that. I'm happy where I am.
So they chose the correct way, right? The only one way?
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's a very big tenet of that religion, right, is that there is one thing you have to believe, there is one way to behave, and if you don't adhere to that, there are dire consequences. So that's still very much ingrained in all of my family. I'm the only one who does not identify with that religion anymore in my family.
But there are really no family issues. They just like, okay, Keri's just decided to do her thing, and hopefully she'll come back.
Yeah, that is pretty much. I mean, I'm not super, like I said, I don't get along with my dad. He's not very nice, so I don't chat with him a lot. I chat with my mother. So, I mean, I guess there are reasons that our family is a little bit strained. I live across the country from they all live on the East Coast. I'm out here in Portland, Oregon on the West Coast. So, I definitely don't see them a lot. So, and that is okay with me. I think there are a lot of people who have a very tight-knit family structure, and, losing that, being able to go down for the weekend and see your mom because she's just down the road and it's not hard would be difficult. But I've always kind of had that wanderer soul that, like, I was fine going out on my own and leaving. And so they're more like friends to me than family, if that makes sense. Like, I check in with them once every week, once every 2 weeks or so, see how they're doing, and then move on with my life.
You're in Portland, Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
It's my impression that Portland is very liberal and open to spiritual people. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. You will see all kinds out here. I mean, visually you see all kinds. People wear the clothes that they want to wear. They dress how they want to dress. And so it's like you almost become... It's exciting. It's really fun. Like, it's a fun environment to be able to walk down the street and see so much variety where you're like, yes, like, just like live your life. Like, do what you want to do. Like, if you want to wear a cape, walk down the street wearing a cape. That's fantastic. Go for it. But then you kind of like get numb to it. So you don't even like realize it. And you'll have people visit and they'll be like, whoa, did you see that person like skateboarding with a crown on? And you're like, oh no, I missed it. But so with that comes like they're putting out what they wear to show who they are on the inside, right? Internally of who they are. And so there's all sorts of people I think there's Druids out here. There's Wiccans out here. There's obviously Christians, and there's a large Jewish community, I thought, but there's it's a very eclectic mix of what you can find out here, which I love. It's very accepting.
That's great. How long have you been there?
5.5 years now. Yep. Moved here in 2017. So
you said that you don't really belong to a religion.
Mm-hmm.
How would you describe that to anybody who asks you, well, what do you believe in? How would you describe that?
Good question. I think probably the most accurate word to describe me would be agnostic, which for anyone who doesn't know, agnostic is just the admission that we don't know, right? That we don't know what's right or what's true, and it could be any one of those religions, but we have no way of knowing. And that was definitely how I initially left my religion when I was younger. Is when I found out that agnostic was a thing, because I was like, that was always what a lot of my anxiety was how do I know that this is true? How do I know that I'm good enough, that, God has decided that I'm worthy enough, or how do I know that he even exists and that I'm not doing all of this in vain? So it was a very confusing time for me. And then I found out that there's a word for just being okay not knowing, agnostic. You can just not know, and that's all right. So if I was going to be asked like what I believe in, I believe that nobody knows. Nobody knows what's beyond death. Nobody knows what's before birth. Nobody knows like what's out there in the universe or how it works. Anyone who tries to sell you on like this is very specifically how it works is like they don't know that. That's what they believe, and that's great. You can have your faith, but you can't know concretely how the world works. So, and another part of like me not knowing is where I said earlier, like I'm intuitive. And so the only thing I can rely on is my own body. Like in the philosophical sense, right? I can't prove that you exist. I can't prove that outside exists. If I walk away from something and I can't see it, there's no way for me to prove it's still there because I only have my own perception. Now I trust that it's still there, but that doesn't mean it is. And so the only thing I can really rely on is my own intuition. What feels correct with me, how I relate to the world. Like my body is my only reality. So that's how I've learned to not access the world, process the world. That's how I've learned to process the world, is just through listening to my own intuition and finding like the similarities between me and nature, because that's another thing that is very important to me, is like we are not separate from the world. We weren't born out in an alien place and like placed on the earth. Like we are created from earth. We are created from fire and wind and water. Like that's all. Like the water that's in my body currently at one point was in the body of dinosaurs at some point. Like that's the same water that's recycled through. Like we are part of all of these elements. So those are the things that I believe. There's not a great one way to say what do I believe in. I believe that I don't know how everything works, and I believe that I'm definitely made of this earth.
Well, just like animals, that's what they rely on, is their environment and their intuition.
Well, and you can see too, like right now when we're recording this, it's winter, and there is a thing called seasonal depression. And I'm not in any way saying that. I mean, please listen to your therapist and do the things that make you function as you would like to function. But I question whether or not like it is seasonal depression, or whether or not it's just winter and the days are shorter and we're not supposed to be pushing and producing at the same amount that we were in summertime, when the days are really long and things are, just flowing, and it's like there's energy in summer, and this is like a hibernation time of like it's time to retreat and it's time to move backwards. But there's that dissonance of like, no, you need to keep showing up to work 9 to 5 every day. You need to keep pushing and pushing. And it's super hard to do that when it's slow outside, when everything's gone to sleep and everything's gone dormant and there's only, 6 hours of daylight time outside. It's very difficult to keep pushing through that. And so I can see why seasonal depression would be a thing. And it's not necessarily that there's something wrong with that human who may be experiencing seasonal depression. It's just our environment isn't conducive to do the same thing every day.
I agree. I'm a high energy person, but in the winter, I sleep a lot more. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I just listen to my body. It's like, well, it's 8 o'clock. I'm going to bed.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing wrong with being like, my body is asking for sleep, so I am going to go to sleep. I love napping. I'm a huge proponent of naps. Like whenever, and that I understand too, that is a big privilege. Like if I'm on shift at a job, I probably can't go take a nap. But luckily for me, I do work from home. And sometimes I will stop mid-project and be like, I'm going to close my eyes. Like I'm tired. My brain is like fried. I can't keep going forward. So I'm just going to lay down and I'm going to close my eyes.
Yeah, and there are cultures that take naps. What do they call it? Siesta or...
Yeah, siesta, where kind of everything closes down midday. Yeah, like 2 o'clock, which is definitely when I take my naps. I did the Wrapped, the Spotify Wrapped music thing at the end of the year, and it tells you your moods throughout the day. Like in the morning, you wake up and they say like what kind of music you listen to. And the midday mood for me was like depressed and I can't remember. It was all these like internal like moody blues and I was like, that makes sense though, because that's the time where I want to go back and take a nap, right? 2 p.m. I'm like, oh, I need to like slow down and wind down. I thought it was funny that I was like, yeah, my music apparently reflects that. That I'm like, this is a slow time of day.
It seems that you living in Portland fits with your personality and your lifestyle. How different is Portland from where you grew up?
Yeah, so I grew up in North Carolina, and to be fair, I grew up in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, which is a fairly liberal, it's certainly not Portland, but it is a fairly liberal area. It's mostly transplants from New York and California that live there. And so I think that was also, I think earlier you asked how I, moved out of my religion, and that probably played a big part, was being surrounded by different thinkers rather than the same thinkers. But then I moved for college to Charlotte, North Carolina, which is a major city, but it's surrounded by farmland. You can't go like 10 minutes any direction without hitting some sort of farm or cows, or it's a lot of the Southern experience, Southern people, which are really lovely people, but they're also not as diverse in their thoughts as you can find here in Portland. So I was always kind of a little bit of an outcast being there. Like I would think differently, or I would say something differently, or I would choose a different lifestyle. Like I don't eat meat. And the choice to not eat meat was like the most bizarre thing I think anyone had ever heard of. And it wasn't that long ago. It was, in the teens of the 2000s. It wasn't like in the early 90s where everyone was, it wasn't a bizarre thing to do for me. But, you would go to a restaurant and be like, can I do that without chicken? And they're like, no chicken? Well, do you want bacon bits or what kind of meat do you want on that? And I'm like, no, I just no meat is fine. And they're like, no meat. They look like you were growing a second head out of your shoulder. And so that was kind of described a lot of my situations growing up in the South was anytime you go against the norm or against the grain, people are they're not necessarily mean. They just don't understand you, right? They just stare at you like, what? They can't fathom how you would not want to do what they would do. This is obviously a huge generalization. Not every single person in the South behaves this way, but it's kind of an energy that I'm describing that you often run into. And so, yeah, and I actually kind of fell backwards into moving to Portland. It wasn't my choice, technically. I mean, it was my choice for sure, but I didn't choose the location. My partner, who I was with, I was going to say who I was with at the same time. I'm still with him. My partner wanted to move. He's into renewable energy, and he wanted to go out west, and Portland is a liberal city, so he knew renewable energy would be easier to access out here. And yeah, so I was like, sure, I'll tag along. I'm ready to leave the South, and so I just went to Portland, and it turned out to be a really great move because it fits really well with who I am and how I kind of view my role in the world.
Let's go back to Naked Body Coach. How do you coach and who do you coach?
So I focus mainly on women, but I'm certainly not exclusive about who I coach with. What I talk about most is living in a large body and learning to love that. However, that is because that's my experience, right? I'm not a small person, and I live in Western society where being small is praised. And so I have a lot of thoughts and experience and to go on for how to accept yourself as not being societally acceptable. But that's not to say that someone who is naturally thin doesn't have their own body image issues and doesn't hate themselves or hate the way they look, because that's absolutely not true. And I know many naturally thin people who hate the way they look. So I'm open to working with anyone who feels like they would like to be kinder to themselves and they would like to love themselves more. However, large people tends to be who gravitates towards me because they don't have a lot of spaces. We're getting more now, which is nice. We don't have a lot of spaces. We don't have a lot of friendly clothing to help us feel good about ourselves. So that's my mission, is to help large people feel good about who they are exactly as they are.
It all comes down to self-talk. What do we tell ourselves? I'm not skinny enough. I'm not fat enough. My butt's not round enough. My boobs aren't big enough. They're maybe too big. It's all that self-talk and all those messages we get from media, magazines. They have large models now.
Yes, I know. I see them. It's lovely.
It is. And they have old models now. Before, models had to be tall and thin and beautiful. Whatever beautiful meant.
Right. Beautiful meant 20. Meant 16 years old to 20 years old.
Right. After that, you're too old to be a model. But now, look at the models that we have.
I'm seeing a lot of wheelchairs now. I saw a few billboards here in Portland where there's models in wheelchairs, which I think is fantastic for the disabled community. And just is all about representation. But it's definitely how we talk to ourselves. One of the things that's helped me a lot in my journey in getting in touch with myself so that I can follow my own intuition is inner child healing. And as I've mentioned, there's some very obvious glaring things from my childhood where I can tell where I was mistreated. But even still, there's underlying things that I didn't realize I was upset about or I didn't realize had even happened. And so the way that I speak to myself is I try and focus on speaking to that little girl, that little 5-year-old girl who was scared. So when I'm really anxious, I've learned for myself that's generally coming from a place where that little girl felt really unsafe. And so I will tell her that I will protect her. I'm here to take care of her. I am here to be her, friend and her protector. And I'm going to be sweet to her and I'm going to love her. And that really helps me build up my relationship with myself.
That's really cool. I have this thing, chair therapy. I'm a therapist. And when someone has these negative self-talk, I'll have 2 chairs. Okay, sit in this chair and tell me how you feel about yourself right now. It could be, I'm not fat enough, I'm not skinny enough, whatever. Okay, my butt's not round enough, I'm not smart enough. It could be all those negative things that people tell themselves. So, okay, get in the other chair now. And you are going to be someone different. You're going to give advice to you, all the things that you just told me. You're going to tell you in the other chair why you are smart, why you are beautiful, why you can do these things.
I love that. I'm going to start incorporating that into my own routine for sure. Because sometimes I don't know if it's necessarily like natural or ingrained in us, or if it's just like taught to us to beat ourselves up. I think we've learned in life that negative reinforcement is a way to increase productivity, which it's not. That's a giant lie. But for whatever reason, that seems to be what we rely on, right? We go back to like, you're not good enough, do better. And that doesn't help us get to where we want to be. So my point is, a lot of times that happens automatically and we don't think about it. We think, oh man, I messed up. I'm terrible. I'm, ugly, whatever it is that comes up. And then to be able to catch that and be like, here are the reasons that's not true. Like, here's the reasons why you're really smart. And here's the reasons why you're attractive and beautiful. And just to kind of counteract it. It's like the two forces battling it out inside your brain.
It sounds like you learned how to be kinder to yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I spent a lot of time being not kind to myself. I think I read a meme, like a tweet somewhere recently. It was like, we've tried punishing ourselves into being better. Like, let's try loving ourselves into being better or something. I didn't quote that perfectly, but that's, it's like we've tried for centuries to punish ourselves into being thinner or being, better or more worthy of whatever religion, like we've tried punishment for so long and we're all still suffering and struggling. Like, what if we tried just like being compassionate and being kind to yourself, not just to others, but being kind to yourself and loving who you are exactly as you are and see what happens. That's what I've tried, and it's made my life exponentially better.
You mentioned inner child, and you had childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm.
You have to think of it as, what would I say now to me as a child?
Yeah, and one of the things that when I first started this work, I didn't realize I had some sort of fear of abandonment because I did grow up in a wealthy household and food was not scarce and I had my own room. Like, I was not worried about being houseless or any of those things. I felt secure in that way. And so I wouldn't think on the surface, right? I'm not like, oh, I'm like scared that they're all going to leave me and that. But there was something in me that felt very insecure because the place that I wasn't super loving. And because I had to perform in religion in order to be worthy of heaven and God's love. So I was terrified. This is something that I unpacked years later in my 30s. That I was terrified that if I wasn't good enough, that all would be taken away from me. And so I did have this really big fear of my security is not secure. Like, my safety is not guaranteed. And so that's a lot of what I say to myself when I'm speaking to my inner child is like, you are safe. Like, you will be taken care of. Like, no matter what, I'm going to make sure that you are taken care of. We are going to make the decisions that keep you safe. And that's a big thing too. I know I've said safe a lot in this recording, but safety, I think, is like that core element. If we don't feel safe, then we start to make irrational decisions or desperate decisions that aren't necessarily in alignment with what we want in our life, but we want to find like a quick fix to find that safety. And safety can mean so many things. It's not just physical safety of like not being attacked, but it can mean like having access to food and having a house over your head and having, like access to the opportunities that you want. And so when we don't feel like we have access to stuff, we feel unsafe. Like, our situation is unsafe. So I use the word safe a lot. That's definitely part of my healing journey.
Absolutely. We have to feel safe and secure. That's how we flourish.
Yeah. And that's where we can really like tap into who we are, right? Like, we don't pay attention to who we are, listening to our intuition or like evolving our spirituality into whatever that would look like for someone if we don't feel safe. Like, first we're going to choose how how can we feel safe? Which we usually, like I said, if we don't feel safe, we're not in the best place to make decisions. So we go to a job that we don't like, or we stay in a relationship with someone who's not kind to us so that we can quote unquote feel safe, find those like quick band-aids that don't necessarily solve the problem. And then we don't have the space to really get in touch with ourselves and really learn our own spirituality and what spirituality means for us, which is where I think the real healing, it's like the juicy fruit part of the healing, is like once you get in touch with yourself and learn about yourself, you start to have those larger standards of what you will and will not tolerate inside your world.
You mentioned you have a podcast. What's the name of your podcast and what is it about?
So my podcast is called Closer Together with Keri Emme. That's me, Keri Emme. And I bring on different guests each week. It's a weekly release. We have 3 seasons each year, and they go along with the seasons of the world. So I just finished up the fall season, and I launched the winter season just last week. And then we'll have a spring season, and I take a break in the summer, which is kind of the opposite of how the seasons work. But I have a lot of other things I'm working on, so I use that energy to go towards my other projects in the summertime. So each season I bring on different guests to each episode, and they talk about the things that they're passionate about, the things that light them up, the things that they get really excited about. Sometimes that's social injustice causes like fat positive culture or healing. Like I had someone on there talk about healing the sister wound in like your own company, so that that comparison wound of constantly wanting to be good enough, or she's doing it better, so I shouldn't be trying to do the same thing. And then a lot of times it's things that people just really love. One episode was about Dolly Parton. This one of my guests just really loved Dolly Parton. I mean, she's a humanitarian. She loves her music. She related to her. She just wanted to spend the time talking about Dolly Parton. So that's what we did. So it's all about people's passions.
That is a really neat podcast.
Thank you. It's been a really fun project. It was another kind of like naked body coaching. It just kind of dropped into my brain one day, and I was like, I want to do that. And then I just started running towards it. We're in season 3 now, I think, and this one's gone a little darker. So this season is more about people's struggles, so that we can bring those shadows to light, so that we feel a little bit more comfortable talking about the things that we're struggling with, rather than hiding them down deep inside ourselves.
Releasing them, letting go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. I'm going to find your podcast and start listening to it.
Yeah, please. I'll drop you a link. I'm happy to. It's a fun one. It's not necessarily in alignment with the naked body coaching, but those two things happen separately. So I'm a multi-passionate person.
It sounds like you're living your authentic life. It's been a long journey. You're doing what you want to do. You feel free to do what you want to do. What advice can you give the audience if they feel they are not living their authentic self?
Oh, what a good question. It's not going to feel authentic every day. So it's really easy to listen to someone like me or influencers on social media and see how they're doing amazing and they've got it all figured out and they went through the work, did therapy, and dropped all of the stuff, and now they're, enlightened and doing these great things. And that's a lie. That's a lie that our brains cooked up to tell ourselves to help keep us safe. But it's never going to feel perfect every day. And part of that is that, that's the human experience. We're not supposed to be happy every day. We're not supposed to be elated every day. Some days are harder and you want to go to bed early, or you just want to watch a movie and put off a project because you just don't have the energy and you need to rest and your body's asking you to rest. And we've learned that rest is bad and that we are doing something wrong by resting. And so maybe that's the advice. It won't always feel authentic to be living authentically, but when you can learn that there's a huge spectrum of what humans are supposed to be doing, are allowed to be doing, which includes rest and includes play and everything in between, all of it, none of it's bad. You're not making a bad choice by taking care of yourself.
And taking care of yourself is not selfish.
Yes, absolutely. I think we're taught to not take care of ourselves. We're taught not to take care of ourselves. So then when we do, we have this nag in the back of our head saying, you're not doing good enough. You're not producing enough. You should be doing more. You should be making the most of your time. And who's to say like what is making the most of your time? Only you know that. Only you know what you need so that you can be your most authentic self, right?
That's right. Thank you, Keri, for sharing this podcast with me.
I'm absolutely happy to be here. Thank you for hosting me. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for being my guest. It's been wonderful. And I love all these new perspectives that people bring to the show. And everybody's so different. And I love diversity. I love that people are different. And we have to embrace our individuality. And that's what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another good piece of advice right there. Embrace who you are, embrace your individuality, and just enjoy what it is that you enjoy. Thank you so much for having me. It was a good time, good conversation.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for Witchcasting with Theodora Pendragon. Have a burning question or have a topic you'd love Theodora and her guests to discuss on the show? Contact her through Instagram at Theodora Pendragon. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And help us spread the word by leaving us a rating and review and sharing it with your friends. See you next time, and may your magic always shine.